Kiss me, kiss me, infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me, take me, wanna be a victim, but it feels like shit. Your touch is everything. It's supernatural.
Good evening and welcome to the Polymath podcast. My name is Ashraq and I'm very, very excited to be here with you today because tonight we're launching something really, really ambitious and something very close to my heart. We've got a great show for you. We've got lots to talk about, lots to get into. But before we get into our very first big story, I want to share with you what this show is all about, what the Polymath podcast is, why it exists, and what it represents. We believe that the world is a very complex place. It is very complex to understand it through one singular lens. But today we are trained and we are conditioned to specialize. We pick a lane, we create a bubble of our own, and we just call it expertise. And this creates a problem because reality doesn't come in departments. It is a singular interconnected system. That's how reality functions. Now, if you look back in history, the greatest minds, they never thought in boxes. Like Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton himself wasn't just a physicist, he was also a mathematician. Da Vinci wasn't just into arts, he was also into anatomy, into engineering. And as a Muslim myself, who's been fascinated with the Islamic Golden Age, with incredible minds like Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, Ibn al-Haytham, and great minds like them who were not just specialists, but they were polymaths. They were polymaths in its truest essence. And they saw knowledge as one interconnected system. And they laid the very foundations, the very pillars on which our civilization still stands on. And that is the objective, that is the mission of the Polymath podcast, to restore full spectrum thinking. Now, every week, what I want to do is, at the Polymath podcast, we're gonna pick a big story, we're gonna analyze the facts, the narratives, the incentives, and we're gonna go into a bit of history. Now, the goal here is not to overwhelm you with the lots of information, but to build the bigger picture so that you start to see the motives, the patterns, the mechanisms of how reality operates. And my central objective with this show is to make it a standard bearer for strategic thinker in today's era of information warfare. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the first very big story, that is the Mar-a-Lago meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the US President Donald Trump. Now, here's the reason why this meeting became the center of attention for many people across the world, for people who are actually looking out for Gaza and for Israel. Now, the reason why Netanyahu went to Mar-a-Lago was to harden Donald Trump's political stance, his position on Iran. He wanted to make sure that he can drag the US into another war with Iran. He wanted to make sure that they still have the United States backing them up, providing them all the ammunitions they require in case Netanyahu launches another preemptive strike against Iran. Now, the problem essentially is that Netanyahu, and not only Netanyahu, Israel itself sees Iran as an existential threat, a threat that has to be neutralized, a threat that has to be taken care of. And that makes Netanyahu keep looking for any reason. Before it was nuclear the nuclear issue. Now it is the ballistic missiles program, which also became one of the issues for the meeting. And his essentially his fundamental goal is to keep the strike option alive, to keep the preemptive strike option alive, and have the United States full backing, unwavering, unyielding backing of the United States in this war. Anyways, let's get into the issues that were actually spoken about in this meeting. The first being the Iranian ballistic missile threat, and the next, of course, was perhaps the most important of all, that is moving into phase 2 negotiations for the Gaza peace plan, or quote-unquote peace. Now, I want to start with the peace plan because it's something which will take a lot of time to actually go through the details of. And initially, I want to present you a report from Axios. Before the meeting, White House officials were genuinely concerned that Netanyahu is trying to drag Trump's feet on the deal. He's trying to pull Trump to his hawkish point of view, to see things the way that he sees, to see Hamas as an existential threat that has to be countered through direct military force. And the White House officials were also concerned that he will try to resume war. And at the same time, he sees the White House as a problem. Because essentially, it feels like Israelis have a problem. Israelis are having buyer's remorse about the deal. They regret entering into the deal. Netanyahu's ruling coalition, which is filled with far-right members, they want to step out of the deal. They want to annex Gaza. They want to end the people of Gaza and annex the region. Which is essentially why he's trying to pull Netanyahu to see the things that the way he sees it. Now, here's the core problem. The White House, it has an executive way of thinking things. At times it is ideological, true, but when it comes to the peace plan, when it comes to making sure that we are doing things the way Donald Trump wants it to be done, they have a more executive way of doing things. Which is why much of the White House is actually frustrated with Donald Trump, with Benjamin Netanyahu, my bad. Axios reports that, this is before the meeting, Axios reports that Bibi is trying to convince a one-man audience. The question is whether Trump will side with him or with his top advisors when it comes to Gaza. Now, who knows what Trump will choose? That is a question before, and that still remains a question. It continues that Trump's team has found itself bickering with the Israelis for weeks on tactical matters. Quote, that Netanyahu lost J.D. Vance, Jared, Steve, and Susie. J.D. Vance, being the president, also finds himself in a tough position. He finds Netanyahu as a problem because all of them, Donald Trump has created a White House. Donald Trump's power circle, it looks like a circle which is always subservient to what Donald Trump wants. It doesn't have an operational freedom as other White House officials did in different administrations. Donald Trump seeks loyalty, which is why the Vice President J.D. Vance, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and his special advisor and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, all of them are finding it tough to deal with Netanyahu on the peace plan. And the only one Netanyahu has left is the president, who still likes him, but he still wants to move on with phase 2 of the deal, phase 2 of the peace plan. And it is true that Donald Trump does not have an ideological leaning as Biden and his predecessors had before. Donald Trump is not an ideological Zionist. He's a person who is open to incentives, who is open a lot of different ideas, but at the same time, you have donor pressure, you have the Israel lobby, you have pressures from all different sides. And that is what makes Donald Trump unpredictable. Now, let's move on with the phase 2 of the deal, which was this focus of this meeting. Now, before we get into the details of the deal, there was a meeting in Miami before, probably a week or two before Netanyahu's meeting with Donald Trump. The meeting was led by the key negotiators from the US, which is Steve Witkoff and Kushner. They met the other three key guarantors of the deal, being the Qatari Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed Al Thani, and the Egyptian intelligence chief, Hassan Rashid, and the Turkish foreign minister, Hakan Fidan. He met these individuals. They met these individuals, and it almost looks like they've had positive conversations about the deal, and they feel like they are positive on moving to the next part. But Israelis, according to Israeli officials, according to Axios reporting, Israeli officials don't see the meeting in Miami as a positive development, which also brings us to a critical point. The reason that everyone is concerned is because this is not the first time that the peace plan, that the ceasefire deal could potentially break. It has broken before. Which is why I prepared a timeline of the failed agreement that was back in January, February, and March. So we had 3 months of somewhat of a ceasefire, which eventually broke down, and then we had the war resume again until October, when the ceasefire deal was again signed by both parties, and we had something in effect. So here's the timeline. When Donald Trump became the president, the vibes around the office was there is an imminent ceasefire, which was true that on January 15, it was set up, an agreement was reached between both parties. The deal was signed. It was a similar 3-phase deal, but the details of it was not as much worked out as much as it is right now, and it had much weaker enforcement mechanisms compared to the peace deal that we have now, to the peace plan that we have now. Now, on January 19, phase 1 of the deal began. There was a 42-day pause in fighting that officially started on that day. What happened later was Hamas released batches of prisoners, and then Israel released lots and lots of Palestinian detainees. That continued. Then you had the aid. Israel led aid in to Gaza, and it was going. It was holding up. It was holding up to some degree. And February 2025, the friction begins to appear. On February 4th, Donald Trump starts to float the idea of a post-war Gaza vision. He starts to talk about Gaza being the Riviera of the Middle East and whatnot. He starts to float a lot of different ideas and talks about these different ideas. But before that, the Israelis did not have a plan for the day after in Gaza, a day after they win this battle or this war. And Trump started floating that, and political complications started to arise. And as that happened on February 10th, there's a first crack. The first crack in this entire deal appears on February 10, when Israel starts to bottleneck, it starts to cut off aid to Gaza. And Hamas then threatens that we're not going to release the hostages. And then Israel accuses Hamas of firing rockets from safe zones, from designated safe zones, and this constantly goes on until February 19. Hamas comes up and makes a final deal that we're going to release all the hostages. We're going to release every single hostage that we have in exchange for a permanent end for a permanent end to the war. and total cessation of hostilities. Well, after that, guess what happens? Israel rejects the deal, and it puts the situation into it creates a more problematic situation, because they want to strictly adhere to the phased timeline, whereas Hamas wants to make one final deal and just finish it in one single go. They will release all the hostages, not in batches, because Trump was frustrated with the batches and batches of hostages being released. He wanted all of them in one go, and Hamas offered a deal for that, to release all of the hostages in one go, and Israel rejected it. On March 2nd, slowly a collapse starts to appear. The 42-day window officially comes to an end without any agreement on what phase 2 of the plan would look like, of the peace plan would look like. Then Israel moves, they cut off aid and electricity. Instead of extending the truce, instead of doing or committing to any of the negotiations, they cut off aid, they cut off electricity, use these things as a pressure tactic to gain better terms on phase 2 negotiations. And what happens March 17 is everything comes to an end. After this 2 week of informal and fragile ceasefire hold, war begins on March 18. Operation resumes. The IDF launches aerial strikes. They launch intense strikes, and around 400 Palestinians are murdered in cold blood in the first 24 hours. And they keep attacking hard and harder. Israel goes haywire, it goes erratic, it kills Palestinian civilians, men, women, and children en masse. They resume ground operations in central Gaza, and they declare that the truce is void because Hamas has refused to release the hostages without a permanent ceasefire guarantee. And that's how the first ceasefire deal back in January went. Now let's get into phase 1 before we actually go into phase 2, because that will give you some insights into why everyone's so distrustful of a phase 2 implementation. Now here's the thing. So phase 1 has 4 critical components. The first is a ceasefire, and then the second is the limited pullback by the IDF. The IDF pulls back to the yellow line. So there are a couple different lines here. You have the blue line, which was the Israeli line of action before the implementation of the first phase, and Israel withdrew to the yellow line. So the yellow line is the line that comes after the blue line, and after the yellow line you have the red line, and after the red line you have the security buffer zone, which occupies a lot of Gazan territory, but still it creates a security buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. Now, according to phase 1, Israel is supposed to pull back to the yellow line. And then the third critical component is the hostage prisoner. I call it hostage detainee swap. And then the surge in humanitarian aid. And according to the CMCC, which is a civilian military coordination center, it was established by the United States, Israel, and a bunch of other countries. It's a multinational entity that created the CMCC to monitor the military and civilian affairs of this ceasefire deal, how it's being implemented. It is headquartered near the borders of Gaza. And according to them, there have been key violations by Israel and Hamas, of course. One of the main bottlenecks here is, which is stopping phase 2 from being implemented, is the return of the last hostage remains, his dead body, Ran Gavili's remains from Gaza, and Hamas is still trying to find out the body. And that is the only thing that's stopping phase 2 from being implemented. Moving on, the ceasefire violations that has happened from the Israeli side has been numerous. There's been numerous ceasefire violations, and that has resulted in the death and the murder, the cold-blooded murder of over 400 Palestinians. Over 400 Palestinians have been killed during the ceasefire. Israel willingly breaks the ceasefire, they violate the ceasefire, and they put the ceasefire back into effect. Once their operations, when they're done with their killing and massacres, they get back into the ceasefire mode. No fire. And in doing so, they've also not only killed the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, they've also killed a Hamas commander, Rad Saad, which earned the anger of the White House. The White House is frustrated. Visibly, they're communicating. They've communicated in a message to the Israeli government earlier this week. But I genuinely don't think there's any point to sending these messages if you don't hold Israel accountable. And on the limited pullback that the IDF was supposed to move back to the yellow line, it has moved back to the yellow line, but it's also supposed to move away from the densely populated areas. Still, the Israeli military maintains a heavy presence in the Netzarim corridor. If you have a tough time understanding where these corridors, the Philadelphia corridor, the Morag corridor, the Netzarim corridor, all of these corridors are, I'll put a map over here. So you have this map of Gaza. It's more towards the northern Gaza. Gaza is split into different parts with these corridors. Israel has established multiple corridors across Gaza, and the Philadelphia corridor is more at Rafah, the border is Gaza's border with Egypt. It is at that end. It's at the lowest end. It's at the southern end of Gaza, and the Netzarim corridor is on the upper northern half of Gaza. Now, the Netzarim corridor has a heavy IDF presence. Israeli military was supposed to pull back, but they still have a heavy military presence there. Not only that, but they have over 40 military installations across the yellow line. And despite the ceasefire, the ceasefire being in effect, Israel has managed to violate the yellow line as well. They've taken over 10% of Gaza, and reportedly the people of Gaza are stuck in 38% of the entire Gaza region. They're limited to the 38% region that is left of Gaza, and the rest of it, I believe it's around 58%, 58 or around 68% of Gaza is a designated IDF kill zone. Moving on, regarding the matter of aid, Israel has never kept its commitment with the supposed numbers that was put up by the U.S. negotiators. They were supposed to allow 608 trucks per day, whereas they only allowed a daily average of 350 to 400 trucks. Gaza has gone through a famine. It has gone through a humanitarian disaster. And Israel cannot still commit to allowing aid, incoming aid from outside, from external countries. It's not Israel's money. It's not Israel's. It's not something that belongs to Israel. We need to make sure that these people die, and that is essentially the goal of the Israeli government: to starve the Israeli population, to starve the Gaza population. And not only these violations that Israel committed within the book, they've also resorted to unique techniques to break the peace plan's main touching points. Israel has also used proxy militias like the Popular Defense Forces. They've used proxy forces, IDF-backed proxy forces in Gaza, across the yellow line to displace the people like the population of Gaza to move towards the south so that they can continue the displacement without the IDF directly getting involved. And it's being done by the Popular Defense Forces, which is being led by the former Palestinian Authority official Rami Hillas, who is cooperating with the IDF, taking funds from the IDF to make this happen. A traitor, not in disguise, but someone who's boldly going out there, audaciously cooperating with the IDF to displace his own people. Anyways, I wanted to move on to the second phase, since we're talking about the second phase for a long time. Now, here's the second phase. So the second phase, just like the first phase, it also hinges on 5 critical components. First, and of course, initially, you have the Gaza reconstruction pillar, which is really essential. That is what Trump's entire peace plan is about, to give Gaza the opportunity to be a commercial hub, to be an economic giant in the region. Well, Trump has that more of a business mindset, which is why he sees Gaza. Whereas everyone is looking to give the people of Gaza a chance to live, a chance to breathe, the children of Gaza to live and thrive and to have a childhood like we did. Donald Trump is more moved by the financial, the economic incentives, like the possibilities that could come out of Gaza. Now, that's the first critical component, and then you have another IDF pulling back further to the red line, and then the third critical component would be the ISF, the International Stabilization Forces deployment in Gaza, and perhaps the fifth most critical component, which is perhaps the hottest topic, that is decommissioning of Hamas's weapons and their total disarmament. Now, so far, nothing on phase 2 has either been negotiated on or been finalized. So far, we have the United Nations Security Council, which has approved the ISF's deployment. It has also approved the authority of the Board of Peace to govern or to oversee Gaza's affairs. And according to President Trump, he's going to announce the Board of Peace in early 2026, possibly this January at the World Economic Forum at Davos. Now, the first element that I would like to begin my criticism with is the International Stabilization Force. Still, there's no decision being made on the ISF yet. No one's sure which country is participating, who's participating, and how are they participating. No one has any clue. Well, the purpose of the ISF, let's begin with that. The purpose of the IDF is to stabilize Gaza. They also want to make sure that aid flows into Gaza. They want to prevent any escalation from the Israeli side or from Hamas's side. They want to make sure that phase 2 is properly implemented. Now, the ISF's job is also to work closely with this new governing structure. Which I did definitely skip when I was mentioning the critical components. Another one of the critical components is the new governing structure that will be put into place, the Board of Peace, and it will also have the Palestinian Technocratic Government. The Board of Peace will be the oversight body, and the Palestinian Technocratic Government will be a body on the ground who will manage the day-to-day affairs, the day-to-day governing affairs of Gaza. Now, moving on with the ISF part, the ISF's job will be to work closely with the technocratic government and to work in coordination with the Israeli government and the Egyptian government as well. They will be deployed in the part of Gaza where the Israeli forces are currently stationed, which is outside the yellow line. Over 70 countries so far have been invited to join the ISF by the Americans. And there was a conference, there was an event held in Qatar, and a lot of these countries were invited, heads of states were invited to the conference to talk about, to have discussions on the ISF's job, what the priorities are going to be. But so far, it looks like only 19 countries have responded with some willingness to be a part of the ISF, but they're still struggling to gather more nations or more forces to be a part of this multinational force. Now, countries are hesitant. They're showing this hesitation to join the ISF because no one's really sure about what the rules of engagement are. What would they have to force Hamas to disarm if Hamas doesn't unilaterally disarm? If it doesn't disarm by itself, would they have to force Hamas? And according to Axios reporting, a European official was quoted as saying they had a meeting with the US officials, and the US officials were quoted as saying that if you're not willing to go into Gaza, don't complain when the IDF stays. So essentially, the idea is that they're still trying to force people to join this international stabilization force. And the critical issue here is that even the countries which have shown willingness, like Indonesia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Egypt, they have shown willingness, but they're not still sure. They still want to be a part of it. What kind of support do they want to extend to the ISF? Turkey wants to be a part of the ISF, but the only nation which has objected to Turkey's participation is the Israeli government. Now, so far, there are many countries, they won't join the mandate because it means that they would have to disarm Hamas. Disarming Hamas is probably the hot topic in this entire discussion. And Pakistan, for example, they say that they're open to peacekeeping efforts in Gaza, but they're not open to force Hamas to disarm. And even the nations that have shown willingness, like Turkey has had very good relations with Hamas. President Erdogan has warm relations with Hamas. And even the nations that want Turkey to be involved, there are nations that want Turkey to be directly involved as an insurance policy. But why is that? Because Turkey has warm relations with Hamas. It's a key guarantor of the entire peace plan. President Erdogan can go on stage. He calls Hamas as freedom fighters. He calls Netanyahu as Adolf Hitler. He calls the Israelis as Nazis, which is why the nations see that these guys have proper relations with Hamas, and they can potentially ensure that we have a good relation with Hamas. We don't get into trouble with Hamas. Before we proceed in the next part of the podcast, I want to take a short break, and we'll return and we'll talk about the ISF's top chief position and the top contender for that position. Welcome back. Now, we were going to get into this background check that I did for the top contender of the ISF chief's position. Now, what I mean by that is the person who's going to head the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. Again, just a little bit of background information on the ISF is that the ISF will be run by the United States. The top position will be secured by a U.S. general, but it will not have U.S. forces on the ground in Gaza. So basically, the United States will maintain remote operations for the ISF, and they will lead the ISF. Now, there's nothing being confirmed, no names being finalized yet, but we still have the name of a top contender for the position of the head of the ISF. Now, it is Major General Jasper Jeffers. He's the Special Operations Commander for CENTCOM. He's commanded Airborne, Striker, Ranger, and Special Operations units. He is a person who has the expertise. He has the profile. Where it gets controversial is that his role in Iraq and Afghanistan, his taken part in Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq, of course, and Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Resolute Support in Afghanistan. He's been thoroughly involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was sent to Beirut in early 2025 and late 2024 to monitor the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire that was brokered by the United States. Now, problems here are manifold. The first thing is this ceasefire that he was sent to monitor, he failed, he had zero leverage, almost limited leverage to enforce the IDF to comply to the ceasefire. And since he, as a special ops guy with a special ops mindset, and for him, the priority is a security first governance, which will definitively create a problem when it comes to Hamas's disarmament. You could probably end up in a situation where he provides orders to the ISF forces to forcefully disarm Hamas. And that could be a problem for the countries who are going to take part in the ISF. Since there's no clarity on these tactical issues, a lot of nations are visibly not interested in moving on without more clarity. If anything, the United States has to provide some clarity on that. But we'll move on to the next element of the deal, which is the Board of Peace. What is this Board of Peace? Why is it so controversial? So the Board of Peace essentially, its job is it's a top level political oversight committee for overseeing Gaza's transition plan. Its job is to coordinate all the affairs, to make sure that the guarantees are set and that they have proper buy-ins from different guarantors from the different sides of the conflict. Now, the Board of Peace will include approximately 10 world leaders, alongside, of course, the head of the Board of Peace. That will be Donald Trump, the U.S. president, and it will be led by 10 other world leaders from the Arab and Western world. And below the Board of Peace, there will be an international executive board, which will ostensibly include the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's a war criminal himself, responsible for the hundreds and thousands of people that he killed in Iraq. And apart from him, of course, Trump's own advisors, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, will be a part of the executive board. And there will also be additional senior officials from different countries that will be represented in the Board of Peace. Now, below this is the main body, that is the Palestinian Technocratic government. It will be formed of 12 to 15 Palestinian people who have relevant management and business experience. They will be selected for the job. We don't have any confirmed names, but a lot of individuals have been vetted by the US and names are being shared with different parties. And these individuals cannot in any way, shape, or form be affiliated with Hamas, Fatah, or any other political factions for that matter. And now we get to the problematic part. The most problematic part of the Board of Peace so far with these selections is the Board of Peace's high representative to the Gaza to the Palestinian Technocratic government. He is essentially the board's guy who will go to the Palestinian Technocratic government and make sure that everything is being done in alignment with what President Trump's vision is. And they picked the former UN envoy to Iraq, Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, as the Board of Peace's representative on the ground in Gaza. Now, here's what we actually know about Nikolai Mladenov. I did some digging into his past, and his name shows up in the infamous Pandora Papers. Now, if you remember what the Pandora Papers were one of the biggest financial expose back in 2021. It was published by the ICIJ, and it leaked the information of the secret offshore accounts of over 35 heads of state, current and former prime ministers, presidents, and over 100 celebrities, business executives and management executives and whatnot. It was a massive thing of its time. And Mr. Mladenov's name shows up in the Pandora Papers. Now, if you look up in the ICIJ's offshore leaks database, it lists Mr. Mladenov as the director and shareholder of an offshore company based in Seychelles called Afron Enterprises Limited. Now, it is also tied to another company which is called the SFM Corporate Services. It's a private offshore services provider. Its job is to help register and create these offshore companies, and its major operations were based in Dubai. Now, what's problematic here was an investigation was conducted by Bird. It's an investigation group. They did an investigation and they reached out to Mladenov, they reached out to the UN, and they did an investigation of their own on the paperwork and stuff. What's problematic is they find a clear discrepancy between what Mladenov says, Mladenov's narration of events, and the paperwork. Now, Mladenov says that he started this company back in back after he was done with his government roles in Bulgaria. He wanted to start a consulting business, and he started this company, Afron Enterprises. And then he was called by the UN. He was the UN announced his appointment to the role, and that is when exactly he forgot about the company, and then he went into his UN role. The problem here is Bird's investigation found out that his UN appointment for Iraq was announced on August 2nd, 2013, while Afron Enterprise's establishment date on paperwork has been listed as August 9, 2013. The company was established after the UN announced his role in Iraq. And according to Mladenov, the company never really operated. It was never active. But the problem is there are no public financial records of Afron Enterprises. It is essentially a black box. No one knows if money flowed into the company. If it did, where from? There's literally no public information about that. Now, what's even more problematic is that right now, I did a research on SFM's Corporate Services, the company. The founder of the company, Reza Afshar, was also an entity who was based in Dubai. He operated from Dubai. And the CEO right now is Christelle Rouanet. She has played a key role in a UAE bank. It's known as First Abu Dhabi Bank Private Bank. And then she moved on to her role as CEO of SFM Corporate Services. You can see everything is sort of related to Dubai, or most things are related to Dubai in some shape or form. To add to that, today Nikolai Mladenov himself holds a senior role. He is the Director General at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. It is one of the top state institutions in the UAE. Again, there's no smoking gun here, but the problem is that if he's going to be placed at the center of Gaza's future, it creates a credibility problem. Because here you have an offshore black box, you have a Dubai-based corporate services pipeline, you have a leadership position inside a Gulf state's diplomatic ecosystem. And what's even worse is the UAE connection. This UAE adjacency, it creates a problem. It creates an optics problem as much as it creates a credibility problem. It creates a legitimacy issue, effectively. And that makes me ask the question that if you are going to place such a person, like such a questionable person, at the center of Gaza's future governance, who is institutionally tied to the Emirates, which has strategic alignment with Israel, then who will this plan benefit? If anyone, this plan is being implemented in the interest of Israel and the United States, not Gaza. And that's my conclusion from this entire dubious nature of the Board of Peace, of the International Executive Board, of the Palestinian Technocratic government. That's where everyone starts asking questions. That's where everyone starts becoming a skeptic. But again, if you zoom out and if you start trying to critique the systems itself instead of the individuals, you could see this entire Board of Peace, this entire new governing structure that's being implemented in Gaza. It is almost an American colonial administration in Gaza. Because at the end of the day, the top board is the Board of Peace, which will be led by Donald Trump. It is, in effect, an American administration running Gaza. It is a colonial administration which is running Gaza. Now, when have we seen this similar American administration running a foreign country? You don't have to look far. It was after the invasion of Iraq, after the war in Iraq was fought, the Americans overthrew Saddam Hussein and they established something called the Iraq Coalition Provisional Authority. And they put Paul Bremer as the viceroy of Iraq. They made him the de facto civilian administrator, the chief civilian administrator in Iraq. And what Paul Bremer did was nothing short of a gigantic mess. He started this by putting an order into effect, that is the CPA Order 1. It launched sweeping de-Baathification measures that destroyed and ruined Iraqi state's institutions, the key institutions that the state relied on. It destroyed all of those institutions. And then by CPA Order 2, he dissolved the Iraqi army, he disbanded the Iraqi army, put thousands and thousands of Iraqi soldiers out of employment, out of their jobs, which left a lot of Iraqi people into total ruin, total economic and financial ruin. And all of these acts, all of these actions, all of these orders effectively destroyed the very structure of Iraqi civil society. And this entire mess, it helped, if anything, it helped fuel the insurgency that later on led to the rise of terror forces like ISIS and the forces like Al-Qaeda. And it became a terrorist hub. And that's what the CPA has been very, very effective in achieving. A mess. Not only that, now we're talking about Gaza's reconstruction, about funds to reconstruct Gaza. I myself would pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. But if you look back at what happened with Iraq, it was a massive mismanagement of Iraqi reconstruction funds. The funds that were supposed to reconstruct Iraq, over $8 billion of that money was unaccounted for. No one knows where that money went. And about more than $1.6 billion of the funds were discovered in some basement in Lebanon. And this is the example. This is the history of American colonial administrations. I'm not going too far as to talk about Japan after its Second World War. This is perhaps the most recent example that we have. In any case, I want to move on to the third element, the third and perhaps the final most controversial element of this entire Phase 2 negotiation. That is disarmament. Now, after the meeting, according to an Axios report, Trump committed to Netanyahu that if Hamas fails to honor the agreement and does not start disarming, he will allow Israel to take military action against the group. He will allow Israel to strike Hamas. He will allow Israel to resume the war. And it looks like it is not only like the peace plan is not only fragile to its very core. Now that Donald Trump is uttering those words, is making the entire initiative more and more fragile. And it almost feels that a peace in Gaza is inachievable even by Donald Trump. Now, White House officials who have been negotiating the deal, including people like Witkoff and Kushner, they've been talking about a phased out. They're talking about a phased disarmament process. They want to focus on decommissioning the heavy weapons and then onto the smaller arms, the lighter arms, and they want to put it beyond use under the monitoring of the technocratic government. But what is Hamas's position on that? Is Hamas willing to disarm? Is Hamas not willing to disarm? According to two different reports, which provide like opposing views, provide different views. So one of the reports that I get from the Wall Street Journal is where Hamas actually agreed to decommission, to disarm under the Egyptian government's supervision. And the other report, which I have more trust on, is from Dropside News. Was conducted by It was conducted by a journalist with lots and lots of integrity. I believe he's perhaps the most greatest journalist of our time, Mr. Jeremy Scahill. He took a plane and flew to Qatar, and he had a meeting with the Hamas leader Khalid Mashal. And in the meeting, he raised that issue, and they were talking about disarmament if Hamas is open to disarming itself. So far, what looks like the case is that Mashal rejects a full disarmament process as the United States, as Donald Trump wants, as Israel wants. They reject a full disarmament. Rather, they're proposing that we're going to freeze and we're going to store our weapons under a long-term hudna. What they call hudna is a ceasefire, a long-term ceasefire. And they could only disarm in the context of a Palestinian police force or a Palestinian state or security framework. That is the only framework under which they're willing to disarm to a certain extent, not full disarmament. Because at the end of the day, I understand Hamas's concern in the sense that Israel has always been open to violating these ceasefire commitments, just as they did with Phase 1. They have routinely violated the ceasefire. And even before the October 7 operation, there was a long-term ceasefire. In fact, and Israel kept on violating the ceasefire, They struck Gaza whenever they wanted, and they kept striking Gaza. And that is the attitude, that is the nature of the Israeli government under different prime ministers. This is not a Netanyahu problem. This is not a specific administration problem, but it is a problem that is tied to the Israeli government. Now, I want to move on to the next issue because we've spent a lot of time into understanding the entire Gaza peace plan framework, which is everything short of a peace plan. And it totally fails to hold Israel accountable, and it absolutely fails in ensuring a proper implementation of even what Donald Trump calls peace. I don't believe in what Trump calls peace, but it even fails to do that. Which is why I want to move on to the next the next topic, or the next issue of the meeting. That was a fact. That was perhaps the first thing that Netanyahu wanted to talk to Donald Trump about, and that was about reigniting another war, a second round of war with Iran. Now, before we get into this thing, the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, he said before this meeting that we are in a full-scale war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. And after the meeting concluded, Trump basically said to everyone that if Iran keeps building ballistic missiles or restarts its nuclear work, he is ready to strike, and that he will back Israeli strikes too. He says, we will knock them out. We will knock the hell out of them. That's what Trump has to say. Now, after that, the Iranian president, he vowed that we are going to retaliate if the United States or Israel strikes Iran, our ballistic missile program. Anywhere they strike, we are going to retaliate. Now, if you remember very clearly, during the 12-day war back in, this is the time of June, July, when you have the 12-day war that was started by Israel, and where the United States later, it eliminated the nuclear facilities of Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, and a preliminary U.S. assessment later found out, and intelligence assessment later found out, that they did not destroy the core components of Iran's nuclear program, and if anything, they set it back by months, and that Iran could possibly start reconstituting the entire nuclear program. Now, here, before we go into the next part of this meeting's topic, there's an essential thing I want to mention. The United States, they struck the nuclear facilities in Iran. They wanted to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Now, according to the US's own intelligence assessment, that was before the 12-day war, before the US struck Iran, their own intelligence assessment, according to Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard herself. Tulsi Gabbard is not a nobody. She was handpicked for the role of Director of National Intelligence, and she's very vocally, very pro-Trump. According to her own statement, according to her intelligence assessment, the United States hasn't seen any evidence to state that the Iranian government has reinstituted its nuclear weapons program. The Ahmad project, which was decommissioned back in 2003. Again, everything is the entire information is public. You could search it up, you could look it up, and you could see that Iran almost never had an active nuclear weapons program, something that was serious. Right now, they have a peaceful nuclear program. It was more peaceful when you had the Obama's JCPOA deal, which Trump came in and he destroyed and he ruined the entire deal. The peace deal that they had, the Iran nuclear deal that they had, in effect, kept Iran in control, kept the enrichment level in control. They had the IAEA monitors in. They were checking what was going on in the nuclear facilities. They could see. But after the Trump strikes on Iran, essentially they're blind to everything. They cannot see what's going on in the nuclear facilities anymore. And Iran has all the more reason to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, why is Trump doing this? Why is Trump constantly backing Israel to strike Iran? Why is he providing unquestionable backing to the Israeli government? Why is he engaging in a war that is not even America first? Now, why is that? The problem is the Israel lobby. the Israel lobby has effectively captured the presidency of the United States. And when I say that, if you look back in history, back in 2024, right before the elections or during the elections, you see the Israel lobby, the main actor, the most prominent actor being Miriam Edelson herself, and her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, when he was alive, he used to lobby on behalf of Israel. Now it's Miriam Adelson. She donated over $100 million in campaign donation to Donald Trump. And recently at a Hanukkah party, she promised him another $250 million in donation to Trump's campaign, in donation to Trump. And this is something that is driving Trump to involve the United States in Israel's forever endless wars. And on the other side, you have the MAGA base, which totally opposes, even the late Charlie Kirk opposed the United States' involvement in Iran, in another war with Iran. And there is a friction, but the only thing that will decisively prove where and what will Trump decide is the midterm elections. The midterm elections in November 2026. Now, Trump's popularity is tanking. Trump's popularity is in the toilet. If anything, he has to rescue that, which is why currently we're hearing a lot of racist statements about Somalia, and then you see the Christmas strikes in Somalia, against terrorist forces and whatnot. You see a lot of these things. He's trying to build that support out of his MAGA base. The problem is, will he choose the MAGA base of support? Will he go for the donor support? Whose support is he going to look for? Because at the end of the day, the donors might provide him the money, but it's the voters who go to the election, to go to the polls and vote for the president. And on the Iranian side, I believe that Iran at some level has to look at this more seriously. Iran has to restore deterrence in the region. Iran has to make it clear that Israel doesn't strike it again. They need to strike hard. They need to strike Israel hard, or strike anyone hard, or do whatever it has to do to restore deterrence in the region. That is essentially the logic. That is the political logic of what's unfolding between Iran, Israel, the United States, and Europe and whatnot. If Iran fails to restore deterrence, Israel is going to come back after every 3 months, every 6 months. They're going to come back. They're going to launch attack with the United States, and essentially they will constantly try to bully Iran. If Iran is okay and open to that, well, then there's Iran. But if Iran is really serious about doing something about these things, then it has to step up. If anything, it probably even has to get a nuclear weapon to defend itself. Because the only sole guarantor of ultimate stability, of ultimate peace, of zero conflict is a nuclear weapon. And is Iran serious about that? What is Iran's security strategy? Time will tell. All right, now we will move on to the next part of this is more about Israel's broader regional strategy, as we can see with the recent Somaliland recognition, a bit of a rough and tough war going on in Yemen. Then you have the UAE, the regional actors which are here. So before we get into that topic, we'll take a short break, and after that break, we'll get into Israel's broader regional strategy. Welcome back. Now we're going to get into the last part of today's show, which is Israel's broader regional strategy in the entire region. Now, we're going to talk about the strategy from the Mediterranean Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Let's get into the Mediterranean Sea. So in the Mediterranean Sea, we have a couple of main actors, being Turkey, Greece, Cyprus. These are a couple of really important actors when it comes to the Mediterranean, and where Israel is essentially involved, deeply involved. Now, Israel sees Turkey as some form of a regional threat. And in order to counter Turkey's growing influence, Israel has recently signed a security, defense, and military cooperation deal with Greece and Cyprus. Essentially, they're also interested in conducting joint military exercises, and this just feels like it's primarily aimed at Turkey. So in that way, they have a proper security arrangement over in the Mediterranean. Now, in the Gulf of Aden, recently you've seen the Somaliland recognition. Now, it did not happen in total isolation. It happened with a proper regional strategy that they are creating down in the Gulf of Aden. So with the recognition of Somaliland, their primary goal is to secure a sea route to Iran in case a war breaks out, in case they are engaged in a war, and also to maintain a Red Sea defense, because after October 7, you saw the Houthis. They were launching attacks against ships inbound to Israel. They even bankrupted the Israeli port of Eilat, and they essentially want to mount a Red Sea defense force to control the Bab el-Mandab Strait, that is a choke point, and they want to control that choke point and want to get rid of the Houthis over there. And in doing so, when you saw Netanyahu, he recognized Somaliland. He says he did so in the spirit of the Abraham Accords under the initiative of President Trump. Now, it's a coordinated U.S.-Israeli strategy to secure this entire region, to maintain their primacy, their hegemony over that entire region. If you remember, Donald Trump was engaging in a war with the Houthis, and then he just signed a deal. He just walked out of that fighting with the Houthis. And essentially, the Houthis' problem is not with the United States. They don't want to attack the United States. They don't see the United States as a threat until and unless the United States attacks the Houthis in defense of Israel. And the Houthis essentially said that in the deal, which eventually kind of prevented the US involvement in war with the Houthis. And moving on, you have the Israelis trying to secure Somaliland, and essentially they're also trying to establish some form of a base, some form of an IDF presence in Somaliland to deal with the Houthis. There's no confirmed reports of that, but it almost feels like that is the strategy at play. And if you go right below Yemen, you see the island of Socotra. Now, at the island of Socotra, there is massive cooperation between the Israeli government and the UAE government in terms of regional security, in terms of defense. There have been reports of advanced spy bases on the island of Socotra. The UAE is operating an intelligence sharing platform with the support of the Israeli government. They share an intelligence sharing platform. It's called Crystal Ball, where they design, they deploy, and enable a regional intelligence enhancement. Basically, their job is to maintain an eye out there to monitor shipping traffic, particularly target at the Houthis who control the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the choke point, and also ships that are onbound to Iran. This is very critical because when you have an Israel, UAE, and Yemen-based proxy structure, we'll get into like how that proxy structure, that defense arrangement extends into Yemen. You would have to have that defense arrangement on both sides, because at the end of the day, Israel is in a very difficult environment. It is at an environment where it has to make sure that it is securing its regional borders which extend as far as to Yemen, because the ships. So it's sort of a zoom out from Israel. Israel's border have to be secure, of course. That is the IDF's job, and that has always been their focus. But now they're looking outwards. They're zooming out, and they're looking at the world map, and they want to create borders. They want to create security arrangements that protect Israel. And in essence, that is the focus of rising superpowers, like Turkey has been doing. Turkey has been trying to create security arrangements with lots of different nations, trying to have the broader regional security. And that is the aim of the Israeli government. And their collaborators in this, their chief collaborators in this objective, is of course the United States government, but besides that, it is the Emirates government, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates government. They've been directly involved in helping secure not only Israel's own borders, but also the far out borders that help Israel prosper in this entire region. Now, we're going to go into the UAE-Saudi proxy war, which is unfolding in Yemen. So before we get into this, I want to explain to you the composition of Yemen, because a lot of people reached out and they were talking about Saudi Arabia launching strikes on Yemen. Are they in war with Yemen? What's going on? Now you need to understand this. Let's start from the base. So Yemen's composition is of three major powers. You have the Houthis, of course, they're proxies of Iran, and then you have the Saudi proxies, and then you have the UAE proxies. So the north is run by the Houthis. The north includes the capital of Yemen, which is Sana'a, and they also control the Red Sea port of Hodeidah. And on the south, you have the Southern Transitional Council, which is, of course, backed by the UAE. It consists of the Hadrami elite forces, the giant brigades, forces like these, and then up in the east, you have the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council, which up until this part consisted also of the STC, of the UAE-backed government. So, and the UAE and the Saudi forces are all anti-Houthi forces. They all oppose a Houthi-led Yemen. And the Saudi forces, it is essentially composed of the Yemeni PLC, the Presidential Leadership Council, which is, they have a president, and they also have other forces like the Hadramaut Protection Forces, the Tribal Alliance, the Nation Shield Forces. These are all forces backed by the Saudi government. Now, the problem here is Saudi recently launched a strike on UAE. It's precisely because Saudi had set a red line that the UAE-backed forces will not proceed, will not move and advance towards Hadramaut and Al-Mahara, I believe it's called. It will not proceed towards these two regions. Well, recently, the UAE-backed forces, the UAE-backed STC, the Southern Transitional Council forces, the Hadrami elite forces in particular, have been advancing towards Hadramaut and towards the other region as well. Now, why is this a red line for Saudi Arabia? So let's try to understand why the UAE is trying to do that. Now, South Yemen, the southern Yemen movement that started, it is economically unviable without the oil fields in Hadramaut. So they need to secure those. So they must have to capture it in order to have a real southern Yemen as a state. For Saudi Arabia, this is a red line because Hadramaut is their backyard. Hadramaut, and I believe it's Al Mahara. Not sure if I'm misremembering it, but I believe it's Al Mahara. You have Hadramaut and there's another region. It is Saudi Arabia's backyard. They want to build a pipeline through it to the Arabian Sea to bypass the Hormuz Strait, which is a strait bordering Iran. They want to bypass the Hormuz Strait, but if the UAE backed the Southern Transitional Council take over that region, Saudi Arabia essentially loses its strategic access to the sea, which is why Saudi Arabia has set it as a red line. And as of recently, so this is 2 days, I believe it's 2 days ago, Saudi Arabia issued a warning, a demand that the UAE-backed forces immediately withdraw from Hadramaut and the other region as well. And as of a couple hours ago, the UAE government has agreed to withdraw, and it expresses its regrets, and it is essentially planning to withdraw totally from Hadramaut and Al-Mahara, I believe. And that is what is playing out in the region. The UAE and the Saudi was almost going to have a proxy war, and Saudi Arabia has asserted its regional dominance. Because before, Saudi Arabia was in a different place, and now Saudi Arabia is at a different place now. Why is that? Saudi Arabia is not at war with the Houthis anymore. After the Chinese brokered a rapprochement between the Saudi government and the Iranian government, the Saudi government does not see Iran as much of as a threat as it does the other forces in Yemen right now, and that is the UAE-backed forces. It has also brokered the Iranian government has also brokered a ceasefire between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, which is why they don't have a direct war with the Saudis. So Saudi Arabia, before, it used to be in an indirect cold war with Iran through the Houthis, and they were isolated from not them. Well, Qatar and Turkey were isolated from the Saudi Arabian regional influence. They were lone actors, they were lone wolves, but now Saudi Arabia has better relationships with President Erdogan of Turkey, and it also has better relationships with Qatar and Iran at the same time. It has very good relationships even with the United States. It has good relationships with everyone, which is why Saudi Arabia is still vying for regional dominance. And at the same time, the UAE is also vying for the same thing. Saudi Arabia does not want UAE to take over its role. And it's always been at odds with the UAE in terms of regional dominance. It wants to make sure that they have a regional edge. But honestly, truly, in a strategic way, when you look at the region, if any country that has the utmost regional supremacy in the entirety of the Middle East, it is Israel and Israel only. Israel maintains the strategic capability to strike in the heart of Qatar, in Doha. Israel can bomb Lebanon, as it happened very recently last month. I believe it was last month or probably in November. They wanted to kill a Hezbollah commander, and they dropped the GBU-39, the bunker buster bombs in Lebanon. And the United States had to go and ask the Lebanese government to return the unexploded bombs, the bombs that never exploded, to return those bombs so that the Iranians, the Chinese, and the Russians don't steal the bomb and reverse engineer the technology and develop a similar technology. But still, America is going to still back the Israeli government. And yet Israel can continue with its reckless policies, with its insane, genocidally maniac policies in Gaza, and of course in the West Bank as well. It can continue with those policies, and it can just move on and the United States would not even care about it. And that is the regional dominance of Israel. And even after the strikes that they conducted in Qatar, even after Netanyahu apologized for it, Qatar is once again open to engage with Israel. They've accepted the US's invitation to a trilateral meeting between the United States, Israel, and Qatar, so that they can improve relationships once again. The same relations which were impaired because of Israeli strikes in Doha. The humiliation ritual for all of these Gulf states here, it's just disgusting. And if they were to realize that, Mohammed bin Salman, when he goes to the US and he talks about the F-35 deal, and Donald Trump gives him the F-35 deal that he wants, and then he returns, and the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, when he's asked that the F-35, it's only being provided to Israel, because Israel, according to US law, Israel has to be provided with a qualitative military edge in the region, which is why they don't sell F-35 jets to any other country in the entire region. And the QME provision, the qualitative military edge provision, it is in US law. And just because of that, Donald Trump cannot sell. But, well, Donald Trump did sell it to bin Salman. But did he actually sell it? Secretary Marco Rubio, he clarified it. He said, we're going to sell a downgraded version of the F-35 to Saudi Arabia. And that is where the region is at. The humiliation ritual just never ends. Israel's primacy has to be maintained at every cost, even at the cost of thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians who are being massacred by the Israelis. And these regional actors could care less for the prosperity, for even the living. And that is where the region is driving itself towards. Is Netanyahu's Gaza peace plan, is Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan coming into fruition? Only time will tell. Are the regional countries waking up? At a certain moment it feels so, but now it doesn't feel so. It just feels like as if the regional nations are just sleepwalking into another war. They're sleepwalking into this new state of affairs where Israel will become a giant elephant in the room, which will come for every single country out there, and it will establish the greater Israel that it's just long sought to build. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. Remember to smash the subscribe button. Remember to smash the like button. Leave a comment. Let me know what do you think about the show. And I will be on the air once every week. At least that's the commitment that I'm willing to make. And special thanks to everyone for tuning in. And we will meet soon again. I'll see you soon. And until next time, have a great rest of your day. Until then, Godspeed.
Get your soul.